Casey's biggest hits.
7 years ago this week, back in 1986, one of the biggest hits in the USA was No One Is to Blame by a musician who spent a decade of his life teaching piano and still gives lessons today. He teaches poor children in the London slums for free. I'll have details and that big hit after this.
And there are 7 English acts in the countdown on American Top 40. Here's a solo artist who's been all over the British Commonwealth. He was born in Southampton, England, grew up in other parts of England and in Wales, and even for a while in Canada. Now he lives in the English town of High Wycombe. Up 6 notches, here's Howard Jones at number 18 and Everlasting Love.
Number 27.
Here's a rocker who says he rarely listens to golden oldies and can't understand why young men want to bring back old music. He says he doesn't mind being influenced by the past, but he refuses to live in the past. This week, that Back to the Future rocker climbs 3 notches to number 27. He's Howard Jones with The Prisoner.
Number 26.
Jumping 5 notches is a singer who once worked as a disc jockey at a radio station in Manchester, England. As a DJ, he used the name John Howard. But as a singer, he calls himself Howard Jones. Here's his latest hit, Lift Me Up.
Casey's biggest hits.
7 years ago this week, back in 1986, one of the biggest hits in the USA was by a musician who spent a decade of his life teaching piano and still gives lessons today. He's Howard Jones, and for most of the 70s, he made his living instructing young boys and girls in the fine art of reading music, stretching their fingers, and playing scales. Sometimes it was a frustrating, repetitive job. But Howard says that the pleasure of watching as young students began to realize how to make music was worth all the tedium. He gave up teaching full-time in the mid-'80s, but these days he does it part-time, volunteering to give free lessons to the underprivileged children of London. And Howard says the sheer satisfaction he gets puts him back in touch with the reason he began making music in the first place, to make people happy. 7 years ago this week, Howard Jones had one of the biggest hits in the USA. No One Is to Blame.
No one ever is to blame.
Casey's Top 40.
Well, now we're up to the first hit for Duncan Chic, a musician who went to a Buddhist meeting for spiritual enlightenment and wound up finding musical enlightenment as well. Here's the story. For his debut album, Duncan hooked up with a famous British record producer, Rupert Hine, a music business veteran who'd worked with some of the biggest stars from England. To help his new client better understand his style, Rupert suggested Duncan get together with Howard Jones, who you may remember with such big hits from the 80s as Things Can Only Get Better and No One Is to Blame. The problem was Duncan was leaving the next day, so there was no way he could get together with Howard Jones. But then fate stepped in. That night, Duncan Chic, who's a practicing Buddhist, went to a Buddhist meeting in London. He says he went there to find some peace and solace and to work on his spiritual side. But as it worked out, his musical side got some assistance as well. Who should be sitting there but Howard Jones, who it turned out is also a practicing Buddhist. Duncan introduced himself, and after the meeting, the two men got together to discuss the many things they shared in common. They began with Buddhism, but it didn't take long before Howard Jones was enlightening Duncan Chic on the fine art of making his music move from the spiritual realm to the physical one. Duncan says, quote, "It was totally random. It was really cool. A coincidental chance meeting." This week, a song that came out of that chance meeting between Howard Jones and Duncan Chic climbs a notch to number 29 on Casey's Top 40.
Casey's Top 40.